Alright guys, in today's video what we're going to be working on is a leak, a water leak, rain intrusion, water intrusion, and we're working on this 2013 Chevrolet Avalanche. And this type of leak is going to be unique to that particular type of vehicle, 2007 to 2013, as well as its sister, the Cadillac Escalade EXT. And so what the leak is, it's coming through, if you're in Colonial English, this Tonneau cover. Of course, if you're in King's English, this Tonneau cover. One of the seals on this is leaking. So if we take a look inside the bed area, we can see we've got, after it rains, we get these water leaks. This one right here, sometimes you get one a little bit to the left of it. So what we want to do is we want to track down which of these seals needs to be replaced. And I'm going to show you a technique for doing that. Alright guys, so we know the leak has either got to be the seal between this panel and this panel, somewhere around here, or it's got to be along this edge seal. There's a gutter under here as well, so we got to go figure out where it is. So the first technique we're going to use, we're just going to take a bottle of water, and we're just going to start adding water, and we're going to go inside, we're going to see if we can see it leaking. And this is going to take a while, and it's going to want to run down, and that's okay. We're just going to start slow. We're going to do that. Now, if this doesn't do the job and we need more, then we'll come out and get the garden hose going. But we've got to at least nail down where is the water penetrating. All right, guys, so we're going to add this water, and we're just going to watch underneath inside the bed. You're going to have a helper see if this comes through the seal area anywhere. Now, it's going to be normal for it to want to run down to the gutter side. So at some point, we'll try to catch on film here it running into the gutter at the edge of the seal. That's going to be at the far, in this case, it's going to be at the far driver's side. But what we're after is not that. We're either after it leaking from the gutter, after it gets into it, or leaking from the seal in the middle area. And we can see, yep, we've got a leak in the seal area. So, seeing the water is not a problem, right? It goes into the gutter. We want to see if the gutter's leaking or the seal's leaking. And so in our case, we have at least one leak on a seal. So we're going to add a couple more shots of this water to see if it's just the one seal leak or more than that. And we also want to see if we got any leaks after the water's getting into the gutter. The gutter is going to take the water back to the rear of the vehicle where it can drain out. So at any point along the gutter, there could be damage where you have water coming out of the gutter prior to reaching the rear tailgate area. So let me take you up on top and show you what we did for this test. You see here, guys, is where it normally comes out the back area, right? So if we look up on top, right, there's no water in here, right? What's happening is it's coming through the gutter, which is right here, right? And it's making its way over. Drips out there. And it's also possible to get a little bit of runoff on this panel area here. As long as it's getting to the back of the vehicle, that's all that matters. All right, just another view of what happens in this rear area for you. So you've got this gutter here that then drains into this one here. And this is the one that drops it down behind this trim piece. And then you've got this one up here that routes it down through the side, right? So if we put some water in this one, that's when we get the runoff here, right? Now we don't have any runoff down here happening live yet at the bottom because that's going to come off from the second one, second gutter, right? So let's put some water in the second gutter up here. Now we can see it runs out down here. So those are your two side gutter drains. This is showing the driver's side, the passenger side's exactly the same. So now let's go take a look at what part of our seal on the number 2 panel is failing. All right, guys, just to show you all I did here, right? I'm just reaching over and I'm just pouring water here. And I'm just letting it run out down through here. That's all I'm doing. I'm not doing anything else. Haven't even poured anything in this area. I'm just letting it run through. And that's all it took to locate the leak. Now, obviously, a video like this is about techniques, and then later on it'll be about part numbers. So it'll also show the parts beyond what it takes to repair this one. I'll show you all of these seals. But this technique, you would apply it if you had it on the forward panel, if you had it in the back, if you had it on the side. This is what you would do. If this doesn't find it, then all you got to do is switch to the garden hose, because then it's a volume of water problem. In this case, it should be pretty easy to see this defective seal, because this is a very small amount of water. We just took a few ounces and located this leak. All right, guys, we just slid the panel back really fast, and what we're trying to do here is just get an idea if there's any patterns that might give us a clue. So we're just looking to see where the water's going, right? So we can see there's water here, it's dry all the way down here, then it's wet all the way down here, then it's wet, then dry, so the water's tracking over to the gutter. It's wet all the way down here, it's wet to the gutter here, and then dry there. It's just something to take note of. It might give us a clue as to whether we've got a problem with this particular seal, but we're going to get it all the way out now so we can look at the gutter. All right, guys, we've got panel 2 out of the way. We've left panel 1. You can see the seal on panel 2 fits into this grooved part of panel 1, and there's some water right on my finger up here. The way this works is water is supposed to run through this gap here that we saw in the video, and it ends up in this gutter, and this gutter takes it all the way to the back of the truck. So if we saw a leak over towards here, I suspect this part, and I'll show you these part numbers in a minute. But we don't have the leak on this side, we have it here in the middle. So because we have it in the middle, and because of what we showed earlier where we see the water running down in some areas of the seal, if it doesn't get into this molded gutter and run down through here into this gutter, that's where we get the leak. So we've concluded now that the problem is the number 2 panel seal, the number 2 tonneau cover seal. So, or tonneau cover, I guess I should say, since we're in the United States here. I'll show you the part number for that, as well as the one for panel number 1 and panel number 3. All right, guys, coming back to our leak area, now that we've done this tutorial on the side gutters, panel 1, panel 2, let's separate this. Now this seal, this is actually the same seal used for panel 2 to panel 1, is the same seal used on panel 3 to panel 2. This seal is discontinued, so you don't want to worry about trying to replace it unless it's obviously physically damaged. There's 2 sources for water here. Water can either come in from the front, right? So if water comes in from the front, it's going to end up caught in that cross gutter that I showed you earlier, or it can wick its way into the back of the seal. And if you look back at the clip where we showed the actual leak, we're not getting the drip on the forward side, we're getting the drip on the aft side. So the problem we have is it's coming through here. So the problem is that underneath the seal, the adhesion from the seal to the panel has failed. That's the source of the leak. We do not need a new seal. We just need to redo the adhesion between the seal to the panel. But while we're here, we could check the forward recovery, which is the water rolling into this cross gutter. So if we move this seal completely out of the way, we come in here, so we have this cross gutter. Now this can get leaks too. What's supposed to happen is if the water gets past the seal, it ends up in this gutter and then ends up over here into the side gutter. We can test that by putting water directly into this cross gutter. You get a sufficient amount of water in here. You get water coming out the side gutter. All right, so that tells us, and we can go test this whole thing by just putting water all along here. We're not getting a leak from this piece of the panel number 1. So that's functioning the way it's supposed to. Water comes over, and we saw that. We saw some water getting past the seal, and we saw it dripping down in this area from when we were filming underneath into this side gutter, and that is totally normal, guys. That's part of the water management system of this particular vehicle. So the only problem we have is the seal itself. So let's go take a look at the seal mating surface to the panel. All right, guys, before I pull this panel completely off and go take a look behind the seal, I want to show you something I should have showed you earlier. We're going to check the gap between these panels. So we're going to raise this panel number 2 back the way you're supposed to, right? We're going to slide the seal into position. We're going to push it down. We're going to come over here. We're going to activate the latch on the driver's side. Then we're going to go do the latch off camera here on the passenger side. And we're going to come back up here and measure the distance between these two plastic panels. Just push it down a little bit past the seal, and we're getting 8.17, about 8.2 millimeters. The specification between this gap on panel 1 and 2 and the same gap on panel 2 and 3 is 8 millimeters plus or minus 2 millimeters. So anything in that 6 to 10 millimeter range is what you're hunting for here. If you didn't have it, then that would imply that the latch mechanism needs to be adjusted. That can be another source of leaks because this seal needs to have some compression to it in order for it to function properly. So let me pull the panel off, show you a quick view of how to adjust the handles, and then we'll go to our particular problem, which is behind this seal. All right, if you need to adjust the spacing, the gap spacing on these panels, then what you're going to have to do is locate the striker for that panel, and you're going to have to loosen these two bolts that you see underneath. There is one here, and there is another one right there. And you'll have to remove the gutter to get access to them. You loosen those bolts, and then you'll be able to slide this striker plate either towards the front of the vehicle or towards the rear of the vehicle. You slide it towards the front to close the gap, you slide it towards the back to open the gap. Make sure you do the corresponding change on both sides, of course. And it's possible if you change one, you're going to have to revisit all of them. Also, if you're in a salt belt state, keep in mind that the threads on those bolts could be corroded, and you got to watch out for that because the bolts can break off. So here's a service bulletin that talks about adjusting those strikers in more detail. And when you can have a leak either between the cargo cover panels of the tonneau cover or all the way at the very front where you have it near the midgate. And what they talk to you about is basically checking that seal clearance like I was mentioning. Now they give you a test, a real simple test where you take a buck and you put it in between that seal. You can also do this test in between panel 1 and 2 and 2 and 3 as well. And what you're going to use that, and I'll show you that test here in a minute, you're going to make sure that this guy is kind of snug when he's in there, right? So you don't want him just to like go out really easy. You want to have him require a little bit of a tug to come out, like they say here, right? Grasp the sheet of paper or the currency and attempt to move it side to side with the cover seal to midgate joint and observe the amount of resistance. Where you have very little resistance is likely a leak point. Now this is the case where you got the water running over the front of the seal, which we didn't have in this example, but I'm just showing you this in case you've got the water going over the front of the seal and it's leaking past that cross gutter that we were showing, or it's on the panel number 1, and like they show in the picture, it's actually leaking into the midgate area, right? So that seal there is a different type than the one we're looking at right now, but it's applied in a very similar way to panel number 1. If the sheet or currency can be removed with little resistance, then the cover seal to midgate requires adjustment. They don't talk about it in this particular bulletin, but that's also true if it can be removed with little resistance between two panels as well. So the seal between panel 3 and 2 and 2 and 1. And there they talk about marking the current position of the striker, loosening those two striker retaining bolts that I showed you, sliding the striker forward slightly and retightening those bolts will close the gap. Then you just repeat the procedure until you get to the correct adjustment. And that is it. That's I think the only other thing to talk about on here is putting all the covers back on to see if making a change in the one that you're working on changed the others. So you're going to have to go check them all to make sure everything's properly aligned and back into specification. Like I said earlier, the specification is 8 millimeter gap plus or minus 2 millimeters. All right, let's see what we've got behind this seal. So we've got lots of accumulated plant crud. Yeah, I'm convinced that this is where the water's coming in, right? Because it's all wet back here. So I would believe that the adhesion here has failed. This was originally applied with some type of adhesive. I see here that this piece is still kind of holding on. It may be stapled on, maybe. get some of this crud out of here so we can see what's going on. It's retaining this. Because what we got to do is we're going to want to get this off out of here. Clean all this out of here and reseal it. Just not seeing what it's bound up on right here. But I think it's the remains of a corroded off staple. That's what I think is holding it on. Yeah. So right here and here you can see, if you zoom in, there's some staples that were used to secure this end of the seal into the panel. So just take that a note, because we want to get this off very carefully. Since it's a discontinued seal, we don't want to damage it. And there's another view of those staples. So what was originally holding this on is like some kind of white caulk that is all dried out. So what we're going to do with this one is we're going to pull the whole seal off. I was just going to try and do a repair on this end, but you can see it's just a matter of time before the whole thing leaks. We're going to pull the whole seal off. We're going to clean all this crud out of here, make this a nice clean surface, get this all dried out, and I'll show you a product I'm going to use to secure it back into position. You want to use something here. You don't want to use RTV. You want to use something that's meant for weather strip seals that's going to stay pliable. All right, guys, let me zoom you in and give you another view of these staples. There's 3 on each end. They're about an 1/8 inch wide. And again, you know, if you're in a salt belt state, these are probably already rusted off. So if I can get this pulled up where I can grab it. Just trying to not damage the seal while we remove this guy. All right, so there's one right there. So we'll pull these out as part of the restoration we're doing here. That one you can see rusted in half, broke. And this is the last one over here in the corner. There's another one that broke in half because of the rust. All right, another thing you can do is you can take your plastic trim tool and along the panel we can scrape this hard, dried up kind of caulking material that has failed, which is why it's leaking. So we'll just use this to mechanically remove this before we get in here and continue cleaning. Just want to get all this off of here. And then we'll do the same thing on the interior of the seal itself. We can see down in here, if we look down into this groove of the seal, right, it's all in here. So we need to work all this out. Just go slow and be very careful. Again, these are discontinued seals, and unless the seal has a tear or a rip, it's completely reusable. It's a molded seal. And based on what I just showed you, there's multiple fail-safes for the water to run around. The only thing that needs to be intact is this mounting channel that we're clearing out right now. So plastic tools only, no metal tools for this cleaning out stage. And just work all this out of here, and then I'll show you the next step on prepping this. All right, after you get the seal cleaned, reinstall it temporarily. There's a metal piece through the seal that can get bent while you're working on it. And we want that straight all the way down. Then we can remove the seal again, and I'll show you what we've got here. So it's next to impossible to get all of this white caulking material off, right? But by installing the seal a couple of times, you can kind of get the loose pieces to let go. I also tried some compressed air. You want to do that a couple of times because as much of this loose stuff as we can to get out of here. What happens is it gets up underneath the seal here and here, and so it just cakes up in there. It's very difficult to get out because you don't want to damage these pieces of the seal, and you try to get under there and scrape it out, you might. So that's the technique. No chemicals, just scraping with plastic tools, fitting, compressed air, and trying to get all this to break off. Now, whatever doesn't come off, fine, leave it there. Because if it's so strong that you can't get it off, it's not part of the problem with the leakage. So just showing you a checkup of where we're at. And then we're trying to keep this thing straight. We also got on here with a nylon brush. That's the other two things we're using. We're using a toothbrush, and somewhere around here that I've misplaced for the moment is a nylon brush. Like this. And that's our only tools for this particular job. So we're just trying to get all this putty out of here, at least enough of it so we can apply the sealant that we're going to be using. All right, we've got this prepared as best we can. And you can tell, I'm not 100% on that, but this white caulking material is super difficult to get out of every single nook and cranny. But you can see that where you want to try and get it to is where there's almost nothing left here. And we've done this through abrasive removal. I used a plastic trim tool like this, like I showed you earlier, to get it off the edges, and then it has a nice little sharp corner for getting it out of these little groove areas. And after we're getting it all out mechanically, then we hit it with some 50% IPA just to try and get the loose pieces off and get any skin oils before we put our gloves on off of here on the top and the bottom. And then what I elected to do, and you can use something similar, I elected to also hit it with some of this GM road and tar remover. And what the primary ingredient in this chemical is Stoddard solvent, like mineral spirits kind of thing. You got to be careful with these kind of chemicals because they can affect the plastic. But this particular one, if I can get some on the rag here, doesn't hurt this kind of plastic. And the reason I did this is I want to soften and toughen up this plastic so our adhesive can stick to it. So I've run this all the way down the length of this as well. The other thing we've done to treat this on the seal side is the same thing with the IPA. We did not use any other chemicals, but on the seal we've dug as much of this stuff out of here as we can. And you may also find there's a little tiny piece of foam wedged up in this little pocket here. I don't know if I can get it back out, but that's just something they stick in there after they staple it. And if you have it, put it back. If you don't, it doesn't really matter, but that lets them pull this up, put the staples in, and then they stick that in there to continue keeping it having strength and rigidity in that area. All right, what we're going to be using to seal this comes from this GM document. Now, I couldn't find anything in the service manual, anything in service information about this particular seal and how it's installed, but I did find information about the midgate weather strip, and it feels like it's made of the same material. And if we go through here, what we can see is they talk about cleaning that particular area with either naphtha or a 50-50 of IPA. So that's 50% IPA, which is what we elected to use here. And then what they do to install it and get it to stick is 3M Super Weather Strip Adhesive, 8008. And so that's exactly what we're going to try on this cover seal. 3M Black Super Weather Strip Adhesive. This particular size corresponds to the 8008. There's smaller sizes too. This is a 5-ounce tube, and it's in the 8008 number from 3M. So that's what we're going to do. So I'm going to go ahead and run these two chemicals down the entire length of the panel. I'm also going to run the IPA down the channel of the seal, and then we'll come back and show how to apply this. All right, guys, so the application of this product, you need to put it on both of the sealing surfaces that you're trying to glue together. And what I like about this product is it stays flexible. So we're going to run this thin bead, relatively thin bead. I'm not going to walk you down the whole thing. I'm going to show you the technique I'm going to do, right? So I'm going to go up here about maybe 10 inches or so. And then what we're going to do is we're going to smear this. So I'm going to smear it all up on the top here, all up on the front here. We want to get everything with a thin coat. This particular product, the thinner the better. So I'm going to run down, it's got to get it going before it sets up. I'm going to run down the whole thing, and then I'm going to flip it over and do the other side. All right, we flipped the panel over, and we're doing the other side. Now, we won't go all the way to the back on this side. We're primarily trying to get a little bit of a lip going here around the ridge that's already molded into the panel. Just going to go down and do this on the whole length, then we're going to switch to the seal itself. All right, guys, so we're done on the panel. Let's switch to the seal. All right, for the seal, we're just going to use the tube itself. Now, you don't want to goop this all in here, right? We're going to put a little bit more than the other places in these ridged areas to fill in those cavities. We're just going to run down like this, a thin layer. Running it back and forth using the nozzle of the tube to smear it around. And then we'll come back along with a small plastic trim tool to make sure. This particular product, thin is what you want, not thick. All right, by the time you get to one end and come back, it should already be drying up if you've done it thin enough. We're just using the nozzle to kind of spread this out a little bit, not actually to put any more in. Now, the last thing we're going to go do is we're going to run a small bead of this along the top edge of the seal. Not here. That lets that run down into that side gutter right here. And as we do that, this stuff is real stringy, guys. As we do that, we're just going to spread it out with our finger, just like this. Okay, so I'm going to continue doing that, and then we'll mate the two pieces together. All right, once everything starts to look dry, you got to move quick. There's a little bit of a hook here that we're going to use to hook into this side of the seal. Make sure you're putting the seal in the correct orientation and you got the right side up. We're going to just work it in all the way down here. And we're going to pull it across the hook here in the back. Now, the best thing we're going to be able to do to help this set up is just get it mounted and pushed up against panel number 1 up there. All right, so let's get this into the truck. All right, slight angle. Get it well underneath on both sides. Latch it on the left first, and then on the right. And now we let it sit. Hopefully that'll do the job. We'll see. Now, that's okay that it's lifting up here, because it was lifting up here even if it was brand new, because there's no adhesive there. That's just cosmetic. We want to make sure that we got a good seal on this from the front side, pushing into that ridged middle piece of this panel. And then we want to make sure this lower part is being pushed on by panel number 3, or rather 1, sorry. Panel 1 is pushing it so we can seal any water tries to run down. It's not going to be able to go down. It's going to have to run to the left or the right and go into the gutter. All right, guys, we've let this sit for well over an hour to set up. I'm not going to separate the panel. We're going to give it a test just after letting it set up, and then we'll separate it and try to put it on and off a few times to make sure it's holding. If we take a look underneath the flashlight, we can see that sitting out here, everything's dried out from where we were testing it earlier, so there's no wet spots anywhere. So let's do it live and see how it turns out. Hopefully we won't have to redo this. Looks like a little piece of leaf got in there. All right, so since we did the whole thing, we're going to end up testing the whole seal, but we'll start with our bad part. And we're going to be real generous here with the water. We're just going to flood this. I want this whole thing flooded out. This is actually a good sign because the water's taken off in both directions sideways, which is what you want to see. Actually, I guess I'll just go ahead and do the whole thing. I'm going to have to test the whole seal eventually anyway. We want to make sure we get it all around here. Now let's go underneath and see what's going on. Perfect. No drips anywhere. All right, we passed the first test, but that is just the first test. Now let's come back up and let's dry this off, because when we pull these apart, we don't want all that water falling down there and giving us a false positive. Let's move it all towards the gutter. Not going to be able to get all of it, but we'll get most of it. All right, we'll take another shot down here, make sure it's still not leaking. All right, good. So we'll release the right-hand side first, and the left-hand side. And then we'll separate this back. Of course, we're going to have some water run down. We're going to have to clean that up. Get some more paper towels here in a minute. All right, let's see what drip stains we got just pulling it apart. I'm going to put it back together again. Latch the left, latch the right, and let's see what dripped down here. All right, so we got a little spot that dripped right here from when we separated it. We'll clean that up here, here, and here. That looks like all we had. So now let's do the test again, and let's see if she holds up after being separated. Same test. Load her up. You especially want to get it on both sides of the seal, right? Because when it rains, it's not going to be choosy about where it wants to go. All right, let's pop down here again, and let's see if we're done with this job or not. Perfect. Nothing. No drips. Now, why is this the repair? Well, let's go take a look and see why this is the repair. All right, we accidentally cut the camera. Again, we were just down here making sure that we didn't have any drips. This is still just a spot from where we separated it. So just give it a little bit more time. Still no drips. So what I wanted to do is I wanted to swing back up on top, and I wanted to show you why this is an effective repair. So let's clean this off again. We're not going to separate it again. I'm just going to show you something. These seals are actually pretty interesting design. So like, right here, I don't know if you need the light or not. Yeah, you don't need the light. You can see it makes contact with the panel here, but it's lifted here. It makes contact with the panel and it's lifted here. So you might think, well, that's where it's going to leak. But no, the way these seals are designed, if you look in here, there's a channel in there. And then the seal makes contact with the panel at a lower point. So that channel catches the water that runs behind here and routes it to the gutter on either side. So when you do this kind of a repair, you have to make sure you don't clog up that channel, because then what will happen is the water will get trapped there. And guys, water and gravity have been doing a dance ever since we ever got on this planet. And they will eventually work together to compromise a seal. You want to let this water travel so you don't block this channel that's under this lip. Right? This lip has to stay free to route water to the left and the right. It might not look good. You might not like that it's raised like that, but that's its job. That's what it's supposed to do. The water that gets in there ends up in here. And that's exactly what the seal's intended to do. So water that gets past the front ends up in the cross gutter of the panel in front of it and routed left and right. Water that gets under the seal in the back here that we're squishing on gets caught in that first lip and gets routed left and right. The adhesive holds the lip's bottom to the panel's part that sticks out. And that is where the seal has to be adhered so the water can't then loop over this and get underneath it. Because if it gets underneath it, then it'll be able to penetrate into the bed area. So that's it. We've got this done. It's a long process of preparation of the surface and using the right materials. If you try to use RTV or silicone on here, it's not going to hold up. The reason is this particular type of plastic is not going to be a really good bond for regular RTV. This type of rubber also is going to be resistant to a good bond with RTV. It'll work for a little while, but mostly just because it's clogging it up. Eventually it will lift and the water will find a way underneath it. This particular product that we use today is what GM uses on the back seal to the midgate, and that's what they recommend to prevent it from leaking there, and I believe it's going to hold up just fine on this panel-to-panel seal as well. I'll take you through these part numbers real briefly in the next clip, but most all of them are discontinued, but you never know, you might find one. So here's the side gutter piece that I was showing you. This is they're showing on the passenger side, but there's one on the driver's side as well. Then there's also a couple of pieces that run along the back. I was showing you where that water runs out on the back. And then there's this piece that runs in the back of the midgate area. And then in addition to these, we've got the panels and the panel seals themselves. So for each panel, panel 1, 2, and 3, there's a forward and rear seal on panel number 3. There's a forward seal on panel 2, which is what we suspect is leaking, this part number 10. And then on panel 1, there's a forward seal, which is part number 1. It doesn't have a seal on the back. This piece that part 10 fits into is molded into panel number 1, which is part 2. And of course, there's a bunch of different fasteners and stuff. So I'll put the part numbers for all of these in the video description. All right, guys, to end this video, I'm going to show you that test that we talked about earlier. I'm going to use the number 3 to 2 panel because our 2 to 1 is wet. And that's the buck test. Right, so we're going to put a dollar bill in between this seal and that gutter channel. We're going to lift up and we're going to close our number 3 panel. Left first, then right, just like it says in the manual. And then all that test is, this should be hard to come out. I mean, you can get it out, but it should be firm to come out. That's what that test was on that service bulletin I was showing you. If you can easily push this in or pull it out without separating these, that's when this adjustment is probably off. Anyway, that's my last tip for you. I hope this video helps you out in getting your bed back the way it's supposed to be on these Avalanches and Escalade EXTs. It's supposed to be bone dry. GM Engineering spent a lot of money, millions of dollars, on coming up with this system. It's actually very innovative and pretty cool. It will work, but it requires maintenance and it requires proper procedures and proper products to maintain the original engineering performance. If you've got questions or comments, leave them below and I'll try to help. If you found this useful, it helped save you some time and effort and money in getting yours repaired, pay it forward and smash that like button for me. I really appreciate it. And as always, thanks for watching.